Midwives and midwifery have existed since the beginning of time. Throughout the ages, women have been healers, diagnosing, gathering, and preparing remedies, acting as counselors, helping bring new life into the world, and burying the dead. With the exception of the last century and a half, normal childbirth was the exclusive domain of women and midwives.
Now, the history of midwifery since the 19th century has been pretty much a story of decline in this country, but it has never disappeared, and it's important for us to realize that. Also, we have always had midwives in America, and we have a resurgence of interest in midwifery today, which I think reflects an understanding of some of the things that women lost when childbirth went into the hospital, that midwives are able to recover.
During the Middle Ages, women were forbidden to formally study medicine, and midwives were prohibited the use of instruments. Women healers and midwives became the target of witch hunts, which were authorized by church and state. The guidebook for the witch hunts was called The Hammer of Witches. Its authors wrote, "No one does more harm to the Catholic Church than midwives." Although these witch hunts did not wipe out midwifery, they stigmatized female healers and midwives as ignorant, incompetent, superstitious, and malicious. This enabled male practitioners of the 17th and 18th centuries to enter midwifery and take over childbirth. In America in the 1800s, middle to upper class women chose to receive their obstetrical care from a gentleman of their own class rather than a midwife from a lower class. Because political power in America was and is closely linked to money, those who were very successful in business and in the upper class could more easily bring about legislative change. And they did. In 1910, half of all babies were delivered by midwives at home. In the early 20th century, licensing laws were enacted to govern the practice of medicine. Medical schools began incorporating clinical experience into the curriculum, and the best obstetrical teaching material, poor women, was being lost to the midwives. Additionally, the money the midwives earned was viewed by the medical profession as money that could have been paid to a physician. The attack on midwives did not mention these issues, however. The public propaganda included stereotypes of midwives as
pestiferous,
the typical old gin-fingering, guzzling midwife with her pockets full of dirt and her brains full of arrogance and superstition,
un-American,
often malicious,
with the overconfidence of half-knowledge
unprincipled and callous of the feelings and welfare of her patients and anxious only for her fee. Vicious. Earning $5 million, which should be paid to physicians and nurses for doing the work properly.
A relic of barbarism.
Filthy and ignorant, and not far removed from the jungles of Africa.
When twilight sleep came in and medical interventions came in, women wanted childbirth without pain, and it was sold to them as a bill of goods. And so they moved into the hospital, which then left the midwives behind, and it left the midwives to the poor and the underprivileged who had no other option. And so midwives, there was also an AMA sponsored fundraiser to actually promote an anti-midwife campaign in the 20s. And so the combination of the two caused the demise of the midwife. On the other hand, I think that it was overkill. And the fact is that now women are beginning to realize that along with accepting the medical interventions, they lost a lot of the nurturing aspect of the midwife that they didn't realize they'd lost until they'd lost it. Because having someone with you in the birth process had always been there. And so why would they think that it was particularly important? It's like not missing a finger until it's gone.
The vast majority of midwives in the early 20th century in America were European immigrants working within their ethnic community, or granny midwives in the South delivering babies of poor black women or Chicanos at towns bordering Mexico. These midwives and their clients were not sophisticated in the ways of white middle-class men, and therefore were unable to defend themselves against the myriad of articles discrediting midwifery which appeared in journals and magazines. Public health physicians and advocates spoke up, but even when they showed examples of better outcomes, they were terrifically outnumbered by those working to eliminate midwifery.
And the reason why I decided to include in this course on the history of race in American medicine a section on granny midwives is, one, I think most people do not know about the granny midwife phenomenon. Two, I think that these women were so integral to the health care and the support of black communities, especially in the South, that were not for them, many women would not have been cared for in terms of delivering of babies, especially at a time where white people were not going into black people's homes and delivering babies. But it was also in that these were women who were not just to be seen as part of the medical community, however you define that, but also integral parts of the community. These were women who would go in, not only deliver babies, but cook, take care of newborn infants, but also were intricately connected to the black community in terms of being involved in churches, also involved in other community activities. And I think it's important for people to know about these women, one, because they were very active, but two, I think it's important for people to realize that the black community took care of itself and that there were women in the community who helped black women deliver their babies. And the other reason why I think it's important to know about these granny midwives is that they're dying out. That most of the women who have been granny midwives are in their 80s now, 70s and 80s, and no longer practice. They no longer practice because they have not been granted license.
I'm an RN and an attorney, and I've done quite a lot of work in the area of midwifery as a researcher. I also have the great honor of serving as the General Counsel for the North American Registry of Midwives, and I work with midwives across the country. According to my research, early 20th century studies showed that maternal mortality rates were lowest in those localities reporting the highest percentage of midwife-attended births. The Children's Bureau in the early 20th century published articles that alerted the country to the many preventable deaths that were occurring in childbirth. And their reports prompted studies of the outcomes of both physician and midwife care. A national conference was held at the White House in 1925 to announce that the record of trained midwives actually surpasses the record of physicians in normal deliveries. Midwives, the conferees reported, took better care of women in labor because they exhibited patience and let nature take its course.
The waves of European immigrants who depended on midwives slowed during the following decades, and they assimilated. As the automobile became a routine mode of transportation, getting to the hospitals became an easy matter.
Because when childbirth was a home-based event, it was an event that women ran themselves, birthing women. They decided who they would invite in, and usually it was their female friends and relatives who they invited in. And it was on their own territory, and they decided, or their friends helped decide, what kinds of things happened around it. That is, what kind of support a woman would be given during labor, what kinds of rituals might be performed around it. Italians had specific rituals, Jews had specific rituals, blacks had specific rituals. And so the childbirth event itself varied enormously by who was being delivered. So in that sense, I think it became a cultural event. I don't say instead of a biological event, but in addition, as much as it became a cultural event, as much as it became a biological event. And those cultural things meant that childbirth varied enormously in our country from woman to woman, from community to community, from time to time, as these cultural rituals and support systems varied by who was in the room. Even what language was spoken in the room was determined by the birthing women and her attendants rather than by a physician who might be called in to attend her. Women were, throughout the history of North America, and throughout all the groups that live here and lived here, childbirth was considered a very dangerous event, and in fact it was a dangerous event. It was dangerous for the woman, and it was dangerous for her possible offspring. And women knew that. They knew that better than anybody. And when I read personal diaries and letters that women wrote from the 18th century into the 20th century, women are concerned with their own mortality and with the mortality of their babies. And so this was a concern that drove changes in childbirth history throughout our history. Women were always seeking something that they thought might make it safer. And beginning in the middle of the 18th century, in the 1750s and 1760s in this country, women started asking physicians in because they thought physicians with forceps, for example, would help them through possible difficult times. But for most of the 18th, for all of the 18th century, for most of the 19th century, and for some women well into the 20th century, childbirth remained at home. It remained a time when they went into labor, and even before going into labor, they called their women friends, relatives around to help, and those women then decided whether or not to ask a doctor in, and when to ask a doctor in, if at all. And so it remained very much a woman-centered event, and a woman-directed event, until childbirth moved into the hospital, which is a 20th century phenomenon in our country. And it is at that point that women lose control over those kinds of decisions about who to have and who will be making decisions about what will be done to them.
The medical belief that birth is dangerous and pathologic evolved at this time and worked most effectively to bring women to the hospitals, although no proof existed then nor since that hospitals are safer than home or that physicians produce better birth outcomes than midwives. In fact, morbidity and mortality rates actually rose during the early years of physician-attended hospital births. In the 1930s, there was a decline in maternal mortality, and propaganda of the day attributed this to the safety of hospitals. However, it was during this time that antibiotics and other drugs became available which could fight infection or remedy a hemorrhage. In 1935, 63% of births took place in the home. By 1930, Massachusetts was the only state to outlaw midwifery, although licensure restrictions and public perception contributed greatly to declining numbers of midwives and home birth.
The question of whether birth became that much safer when women moved into the hospital to deliver is also something that we can't answer 100%, but which we have some information about, and that also has to do with increased infection rates, because the hospital was a place where a lot of sick people went, not just well people delivering babies, and some of that sickness was infectious, and some of that infection clearly transferred to birthing women in hospital situations.
During World War II, about half of all babies were born at home, but by the 1950s, 90% of births took place in the hospital with a physician. Some women were not content with the institutional birth experiences that were offered to them in the 40s and 50s and looked for another way. The desires of those women was the source of the natural childbirth movement. During the 1960s and 70s, state after state quietly passed laws which prohibited midwifery, refused to issue new licenses, or in other ways placed enormous barriers in the path of those desiring to practice as midwives. Many southwestern Hispanic women and Amish and Mennonite women continued to have home births with midwives. Not until the 1970s, however, would there be a general resurgence of midwives and home birth. In the early 70s, only 0.5% of births were attended by midwives, but a decade later, this number increased over fourfold. By the 1980s, many direct entry midwives and nurse midwives were dissatisfied with their identity and felt that midwifery needed to be recognized as its own profession rather than as an extension of nursing or medicine, and formed the Midwives Alliance of North America. A formal validation process of midwifery knowledge and skills was created, leading to certification as a certified professional midwife. The certified professional midwife, CPM, is required to have out-of-hospital birth experience. A joint statement was signed by the national boards of both Midwives Alliance of North America and the American College of Nurse Midwives in 1993 that proclaimed, "A certified midwife, either direct entry or nurse midwife, is a person who has successfully completed prescribed studies in midwifery and has met the requisite qualifications to be certified." Through this agreement, a variety of educational routes were recognized as valid pathways. The American College of Nurse Midwives has since backed out of this joint agreement. The 1980s and 1990s saw many states pass laws favorable to direct entry midwifery. In almost every case, the main opponent to licensure or legalization was the state's medical society, nurses, or nurse midwifery organizations. Many of the routines that are commonplace in hospitals have no value according to science. The Oxford Perinatal Project looked at research that dealt with maternity practices from the past 40 years and concluded, it is inherently unwise and perhaps unsafe for women with normal pregnancies to be cared for by obstetric specialists. Some of those unnecessary practices are supine position, electronic fetal monitoring, routine IV, enema, perineal shaving, episiotomy, and oxytocin use.
The United States has an unbelievable high rate of unnecessary obstetrical interventions. I'm talking cesarean section, forceps and vacuum. I'm talking epidural, episiotomy, ultrasound, electronic fetal monitoring. All of these technologies are used far, far more in this country than in other countries. And you don't get any better results in this country.
If you have a baby at a hospital, you are much more likely to have some kind of routine procedure, intervention, or test, which you didn't really need to have. And in that case, you're going to be running the risks. You have a healthy person having something they don't need to have. Every time you do something to someone, there's always a risk. It might be small, it might be fairly sizable. But if you're starting with a person who didn't need to have that test or procedure, then you're running the risks with no counterbalancing benefits.
At the time, it was the typical going through labor. I was at my worst time at that time. And of course, they pulled Larry out and said, "You got to do this." So they hit him from all angles. So we just said, okay, and we trusted the doctors. And we had Michelle through C-section. So we had a few years in between. And when Christopher was, I think he was 3 then, and everything in our life was changing. And so I thought, I've got to know if I can have a baby naturally. And so I prayed that we would have, that I would get pregnant again, and immediately I got pregnant again.
Which was a surprise to me.
I'm doing this all behind him, and him not knowing any of this. And so the first thing I thought was, I've got to find a midwife. I had belonged to Malaysia League, and Malaysia League had a special session meeting one time with a midwife. They invited a midwife, which was Denise. And she came in and spoke. The first thing I thought was, this is crazy, having a home birth. I was totally against home births and everything. But this is what stuck in my mind for the next 3 years, was that's the only way that I could get around another C-section. Doctors didn't want to touch me. I had 3 C-sections already.
In a way, victimized by modern obstetrics, because that's where we're at. They also said that they would get a court order to do a cesarean, and these were like home birth doctors. So I get in the hospital, I was fully dilated, and then, so I thought, oh good, you know, we made it. But no, because I didn't get to the push stage yet. So I get to the hospital, so I'm all monitored up, which I understand why this guy did it, but I don't excuse, you know what I mean? Like, I understand it, but it doesn't excuse it. Like, doesn't matter that they all would have done that. I mean, they were all wrong to do it. But anyway, so I had blood pressure, cuff on, internal, external monitor, IV, which they couldn't get in this. And the doctor, we just sat there, and then they gave me Pitocin, which really scared me because I had Pitocin with my first birth. And then I said, please give me a seat. And then the pain got really bad. I said, no, please, please, I can't take this anymore. I'm ready to quit. Just give me a section. So anyway, so then they did a C-section, which was better than my first birth because at least I had an epidural. I had 2 cesareans, so I was ready to look for alternate medicine. But actually, anyway, so for my next birth, I was definitely ready not to go with the medical community, like, at all. So that's how, I remembered Valerie, and so we went with her and had a great home birth with her, marvelous, wonderful, no problems. You know, the Dr. Brewer had written a letter saying I could probably only deliver a 5-pound baby, and she was 7 pounds. Well, there we go. She was 7 pounds 14 ounces, and it was the best experience of my life. I made noise in labor. They didn't say one negative things after she was born. Just not. I would encourage women that had cesareans, if they want to try again. I know a lot of women with cesareans will not ever have another baby, which is real sad, but to hang in there. Because if I can have a VBAC, anyone can. I mean, anyone can have a VBAC. If I can have a VBAC with all of the hassle that I went through, I mean, I know they can.
And we believe, and we are taught to believe, that the more technology we have, the more safe we are. What most people don't think about, and those who haven't had the experience in a hospital environment like that don't understand, is that technology in the hospital is the way that the whole medical industrial complex is able to generate money. In those cases, technology is used more. Though the risks to the mother and infant go up, technology allows the birth machine to generate more money at the expense of the mother and the infant's health. And I think that's a real shame. Those people that work in the hospital environment understand that. Many of them do. And it's something that we've got to educate the public about.
If you do epidural or these kinds of things, you take away the pain and you take away the optimal birth. And by the way, anybody who tells a woman that epidural is safe is lying, because the scientific literature is clear. There are all kinds of risks for the woman and all kinds of risks for the baby. Example, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists has a report just put out that says in black and white that around 10% of all babies whose mother has an epidural are so short of oxygen that their heart is fluttering and there's abnormalities on the electronic fetal monitor. The American public doesn't know these things. They don't know that epidural can be dangerous. They don't know that cesarean can be dangerous. They don't know that babies die. You see, the mortality rate for babies around the time of birth is not zero. And many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of babies die around the time of birth in the hospital with all the doctors and all the machines.
Although the major medical organizations are opposed to anyone but physicians taking full responsibility for pregnancy and birth, some physicians and associations of physicians recognize the value of midwives. In a letter to the editor, which was published in the Chicago Tribune, William White, M.D., Secretary of the American College of Home Obstetrics, wrote,
"The American College of Home Obstetrics supports the efforts of organizations of midwives to establish standards of training and licensure. Home birth is the gold standard of maternity care. More cooperation and less competition between the time-honored professions of medicine and midwifery will benefit doctors, midwives, and most important, patients."
In the periodical American Health and Infant Survival, C. Arden Miller, M.D., wrote,
"Midwives are known to render services that are of high quality, economy, and comprehensiveness, attributes that do not always characterize obstetric care."
To learn, so easy to summarize. Just what we have to remember. If we want to improve the outcomes, if we want to make obstetrics cheaper, if we want to reduce the rate of cesarean section and other intervention, we just need to increase the number of midwives and to reduce the number, gradually of course, the number of obstetricians. We must increase, and this is a priority, the ratio of midwives to obstetricians.
The American Journal of Public Health published a research article by A. Mark Durand, M.D., Master of Public Health, who stated,
"Home births attended by lay midwives can be accomplished as safely as, and with less intervention than, physician-attended hospital deliveries."
I certainly think that 95% of babies should be born at home, that the midwife or natural birth physician can help the mother and help the husband to help the mother, and share in their joy when the baby comes. I think this would be better for everybody, and safer, more satisfying, and more joyful.
A home birth with a midwife costs far less than a hospital birth.
The arguments in America are really arguments to get the women to come to the obstetricians and come to the hospitals. It really is all about money. getting the business by having all the women come. And this is really very tragic because the United States spends twice as much money on maternity care as any other country in the world. And yet the results are not better.
Well, I think definitely. I think it's, for the amount of care given, it's extremely economical as far as you don't have to pay everybody and his brother at the hospital. I mean, everybody's got a hand in it in the hospital, and you pay everybody in the hospital. It's one of those things that I don't know if it's a good phrase is to cut out the middleman, but it's like Jenny was saying before, the being so personable, and it's just if it did cost as much as the hospital, if it did cost twice as much as the hospital, it'd be worth every penny of it.
The question that comes up when someone mentions home birth is it safe? What if something goes wrong? And the thing about asking that question is that it makes a number of hidden assumptions. It makes 4 of them, I think. The first one is, it assumes that what can go wrong at a birth is usually an emergency. And that's not true. Most of the things that go wrong at a birth, which would require a transfer into the hospital, are things where things just aren't going that well. We've tried what we know to do here, and everybody kind of piles into the car and ambles on over to the hospital. It's not an emergency, contrary to what you see on TV. The second hidden assumption is that the emergencies that do occur always require a hospital facility to deal with. Now, the 2 most common emergencies that you don't see coming, they're rare, but of the things that can happen, they're the most common, are a baby that doesn't breathe spontaneously at the birth, or a mother who bleeds heavily after the birth. And both of those situations are situations which are routinely handled with portable equipment. You have to have a skilled person, but they don't need a lot to either resolve the problem or at least stabilize it so the mother can be moved to the hospital or the baby can be moved to the hospital for further care. The third hidden assumption is that hospitals can always handle those rare, unpredictable emergencies better than they would be handled at home.
Many doctors who have no knowledge or experience of home birth at all do think that it's inherently unsafe and terribly risky and so forth, and the statistics don't support that. Most breeches can deliver safely at home, but the fashion in this country is to do cesareans on anybody who's a little bit different from average, let alone abnormal, and this is why we have a rate of about 25% in the United States of sections.
I was in the Peace Corps in Africa in 1970, and one of the many neat things that I got to do was see a baby be born. And one of my best friends there was a midwife in the village where I lived. So at that point I thought, this looks relatively, I mean, it didn't look easy, I don't want to say that, but it's birth and death and all of that was so much more a normal part of life there, and it wasn't so removed and put into a medical model. So, you know, our expectations weren't that she would produce a perfect baby. If something went wrong, it wasn't going to be her fault, you know, and all of that. Really, when it came down to the day that I went into labor, I really had no concerns about the medical stuff. I thought, if worse comes to worse, I'll just go use, if I need the medical establishment, I'll use it. I'm not anti, you know, white Western medicine. I'm just would like to see it expanded to include more of what we know in the world, you know.
So I'm not saying safety wasn't a concern, but I felt safest actually with these midwives.
American obstetricians always argue about the risks of birth and the importance of safety, and use the safety argument to insist that women come to them for care and come to the hospital for the birth. So the issue of safety is a false issue, and all of the scientific research shows that home birth is just as safe or safer for the woman who has had no obstetrical complications during the pregnancy. In other words, the vast majority of women. You see, the obstetricians want to keep the midwives out. Hey, that's competition. Now, push the midwives out, say that the midwives aren't safe, which is a lie, say that home birth is not safe, which is a lie, and the scientific data proves that midwives are safe and home birth is safe. But the doctors tell those lies in order to push the competition out.
It was because there is such a critical need for maternity services, healthy maternity services in this state. There are some rural counties where there are no primary care physicians at all. So there are women who don't even have a choice. They have nobody to deliver their babies. And they can make a significant difference in infant mortality rate and also low birth weight babies. And I am here to say that they can do the job. I've checked the research. We know that they can do the job, but there are a few problems. There are barriers, and many of you know what the barriers are. And some of the barriers are that physicians don't accept them, hospitals don't accept them, and insurance companies don't accept them. Now, those are three significant barriers, but I think it's time for us all to join together to realize that delivering a baby and having a baby is a normal, healthy event. It's not illness. It's not disease, it's not pathology, it's normal and it's healthy and it's a wonderful experience.
I think that home births mostly will always be attended by midwives and some family practitioners like myself, and possibly a few obstetricians would like to try it, but I think they'd have to keep very quiet about it among their colleagues.
It should be pointed out that all the countries, or most of the countries that have much lower infant mortality rates than our country, have primarily midwifery care for their women. And it's not just midwifery care. Midwifery is seen as a separate profession from the medical establishment. And it's well established, and it's proven that it works. The World Health Organization has tried to promote midwifery in our country because they've seen how well it works in other countries. And there's just so much resistance. And I think primarily it's because the medical community has such a hold on birth practices in this country.
Midwifery is kind of like bringing back that role of women, and Indian, specifically the Iroquois people, are a matriarchal society, and the women did have a lot of power and still do in a lot of the government issues and final say about who our chiefs are. And so I thought that midwifery would empower me spiritually as well as health-wise, you know, and it would make a statement to other Native American women that, yeah, we can take care of ourselves, and we have that knowledge, and as women, we used to have that, and so, you know, let's take some of that back. I think the society we're living in today doesn't give you the full experience of what childbirth is about, and spiritually, as well as physically. And I think as a midwife, I mean, this may be different, but for me as a midwife, I don't think spirituality can be separated from the physical process. And with midwifery, you're able to acknowledge the spiritual part of childbirth. And I think that the spiritual and the physical all go hand in hand, like mind, body, and spirit. And I think that the medical society is missing that. You know, they have the physical part. And, you know, my own belief about that is that if we have all them three in balance, then we're able to have healthier babies and have uncomplicated deliveries. Less, you know, I believe that we do need the medical system and they are there for a purpose, but I think there's too much intervention.
That's the key issue, is that I felt like I had some control. But it changed just the atmosphere, and my feelings about the whole experience are so different. And I think the family participation and friends who were also there, it was really neat for them and for me to have that.
I was given a lot more choices and made aware that I had the choices. And she stressed the fact that when options arose, the midwife will give you the options, give you their recommendation, and then the patient, would make the choice as to what we want to do at each step of the way. Assuming it wasn't an emergency, assuming it wasn't life-threatening, then in as much as practical, I was given the final say, as opposed to a doctor who not only doesn't tell you what the options are, but they don't give you the choice to choose any options.
I like the idea of having one person treat me through prenatal care, through the delivery, knowing that I know that person, I'm going to be comfortable with her, and that she'll be there and help me through it in a relaxed and easy manner.
It would have been my choice to have a midwife, but there were no midwives in northern Wisconsin, and there were no doctors who would do a home delivery, so we just did one ourselves. And I would have preferred to have had someone there, but there was nobody. And I'm more afraid of the hospital than I was of having the baby at home alone. Why is that? Because I think there's a lot of interventions that happen in hospitals that are unnecessary, and you know, raise the rates of cesarean sections and episiotomies and internal fetal monitors and all those kinds of things that you just don't need to be involved with. I don't think they're good for moms or the babies.
There's a lot of lesbians who are having babies now. And they need to have the information also.
I don't know how conscious that decision was, but I'm sure it had something to do with it. I wanted to be able to control the environment as much as possible. And that included having, you know, it be pretty much a space where women would be. I didn't really want to have male doctors.
And I had another option, which I was eventually able to pursue when my third child was born at home, underwater, with my husband in attendance, as well as my mom and my best friends and my midwives.
Do you feel you have a right to choose a home birth with a midwife?
Yes, I feel that it's my right to choose home birth and to choose a midwife. I feel that it's no one's business how I decide to have my children, as long as they're born healthy and as long as I take care of them.
Do you think childbirth is a medical event or a normal
I feel that
event?
childbirth is a natural, healthy event. There's no illness there. It's not an illness, so it shouldn't have to take place in a hospital. Home birth should take, or birth should take place at home, I feel.
Those who give birth at home usually accept more responsibility for the birth. In what way do you think you did that, as opposed to if you had gone to a hospital and given birth?
We took on more responsibility in the fact that we took the time to educate ourselves, to know what we needed to know.
But all I can say is I can't imagine having any other birth at times
or any future children than in my own home. It's the most comfortable, and with the hearing problem that I do have, I can be sure that I hear everything. Nothing is omitted.
For me, it was both a philosophical, spiritual decision to have a home birth, in that what I see after having been in a field of nutrition for 26 years is a fundamental flaw in the way that traditional conservative doctors think, and that is that the human body is not capable of doing what it does, that there has to be what's been termed heroic intervention, and home birth allowed Anne to go through the birthing process without heroic intervention. In other words, we ended up trusting the process itself, and I think that's what's missing in anything outside of home birth.
Well, it's a very nice experience because I don't know, sometimes we think it's going to be like a whole mess, or you're going to be I don't know, and it's not that way. It's very clean, cleaner than a hospital. It was for us, I don't know.
Well, this birth definitely gave me a dignity that I never felt before. I did feel like this is the way it was supposed to be. I did feel so in control. I felt very proud of myself. I felt like everything was revolving around me and this little creature that was entering the world. And it gave me such a high that there's no drug on the face of this earth that could give me that kind of feeling. Elation afterwards was wonderful. I just felt like I was beaming, and I did feel just great.
The number of midwives, fortunately, is increasing, and hopefully there will be more home birth physicians, although I haven't seen much increase up to this time. But we need people like that to provide safe home births.
But home birth is there for you. Home birth is following in a tradition of safety, a tradition of knowing. If home birth essentially had not been safe over the millennia, we would not have a race of human beings. I can say to women, your body was made to do this. Your body was shaped to carry and birth children. This is your heritage as a human being.
This is all part of normal life. And birth, pregnancy and birth, is not a medical event. It doesn't belong to the doctors. It doesn't belong to the hospitals. It belongs to the family. And it belongs to the woman. And it should be one of the happiest moments in all of family life. And you see, it's been stolen from the family. And the real issue in America is not safety. The real issue is freedom. The freedom of the American family to choose the kind of birth that they really want, with full, honest information.
For the great majority of American women, the right to choose the place and manner of giving birth has quietly but continually narrowed. In just half a century, allopathic physicians in the United States have enticed 99% of us into their places of business, hospitals, for childbirth, forced on us a medical model of birth that's never been proven safe or beneficial, raised the price of services which have diminished in quality and quantity, and lobbied state legislatures for laws that would require us to submit to their exclusive control during pregnancy and childbirth.